the fact that they were all living together and fucking each other in this giant penthouse, this $40 billion penthouse. The things, it's insane. It's really, I almost wish
money and go start trading with it, unless, you know, obviously we have FDIC insurance, stuff like that. But like they didn't have that. They just take your money, go trade with it, and that's where the disaster started.
Regulated, like if he was doing this, like Coinbase can't do this. Is that correct?
Yeah, Coinbase is much more heavily scrutinized. They actually have to file with the SEC. He launches Alameda Research first, which is just like this trading firm, which basically the idea here is we have some ideas, we're going to raise a little bit of money, and we're going to reasons that our banks have a bunch of anti-money laundering laws. There's a reason that they have all sorts of finance laws. It's not for their safety, it's for your safety. I mean, it's like they need to, you know, caught. In my view, what he did was criminal. That's why I started. But it hasn't been prosecuted or anything like that. But he's on a leaked private call. Everyone can go listen to it yourself. It's just this shit from the, you know, the arms of one huckster to another. Like it's just like it's almost to something worse. There are fight, like one of the best ways to fight crime is at their wallets, like, you know, like take away their banking. And crypto has just really revitalized that because, and it's like, well, what's fungibility mean? It means whether you were a guy withdrawing who is this degenerate day trader, like the house always wins, right? So when FTX was taking off, it just seemed like everyone who was someone was backing him. So then it was okay. And then I think a lot of these people deferred. It's really interesting because it was like a battle between FTX and one of their competitors, Binance. So the owner of Binance is, I think it's Changpeng Zhao. He goes by C.
Jamie's looking it up.
I thought I knew it off the top of my head, and now I don't want to say the wrong one. A16Z.
A16. Ultimately going to find out what we're doing here.
How many more of these are out there in the world?
As big as FTX?
Down. Because it seems like they received additional scrutiny, right? Because now people are starting to look at it, and I saw that their value went down considerably. Or is it just pure addiction? I think, you know, those multiplayer games, those, you know, online role-playing games, that's what that is, right? It's like
I think it's is it a MOBA? Actually, campaign finance laws, I've heard, are pretty weak. I forget the name of the law, but it was passed in like the early 2000s, 2010s maybe, where it actually became very easy to donate
crypto.
Ransomware, yes.
Yeah.
Yes, 100%. Because before, it was like, okay, you need to use like Western Union or sort of one of these like these places where you can kind of send money without too much scrutiny. Might be one of the first like trillionaires or whatever, like he's such a great entrepreneur. They think he's such a genius. It might have been one of the A1Z guys, or change that money for some type of crypto token. There's a lot of different tokens out there. And
explain tokens, because I don't understand tokens. I know there's crypto and there's tokens. Like, what is the difference between the two?
There was a lot of fear of missing out, or FOMO, in the markets at the time. You know, everyone thought, oh, cryptos, you have to get in now, right? Because if you get in now,
go back to making money again.
I don't think he thought he would repay everyone, but everyone thought like, oh, we'll just enter Chapter 11 bankruptcy. We'll restructure the company. We'll reopen. We'll just turn all the debt into new, hey, just make this problem go away. This is the CEO. Like, go blame it on somebody else. Go blame it on some, like, you know, third party that got access to our website. Say it was like a glitch or something. And so I'm this guy who's going to maximize good in the world, you know, and that was his reason for working all the time. I mean, that's the justification to be hopped up on amphetamines. It's like maximize productivity, maximize human happiness. You know, there were things that were coming out, like questions about, you know, okay, they say they have all this money. Where on chain is it? So like the blockchain, everything's publicly, you can see it. And then he goes into the crypto space and he launches FTX.
He's very young, right? How old is he?
I think he is young. I'm not, maybe you can look that up, Jamie. 31. Handle now is they're finding a bunch of campaign finance violations because he was trying to influence politics, U.S. politics. I mean, it's insane how deep. Like, they tracked his account. He's playing League while on calls about the failure of FTX. Wow. Just imagine the arrogance.
Is that arrogance?
You can know their assets. So it's like a big thing recently in crypto. They'll say, hey, we're going to show you proof of reserves. What does that mean? They mean we'll show you on chain all our. What he said in one of the interviews, he goes, no one believes me when I said I donated dark because no one believes anyone would be like, everyone wants the credit for donating. No one believes that I just do it on the sly. There's wire transfer and it's kind of expensive to do these. Like you pay all these fees for wire transfers. So the idea is like, okay, well, if you have crypto, those wire fees can go down. And instead of taking, maybe a day or something, it'll take like annoying. So like
that.
The famous example is like Coinbase is in America and they have to file all these forms. They're a regulated entity. They're publicly traded. Ethereum, what are we tracking here? And then it goes to some mixer somewhere. And then we don't know where it goes after that.
So when Sam Bankman-Fried was working with
that's the issue was FTX's problem was not CZ. Ultimately, he's kind of the guy who like pushed over the house made pilfering FTX, the customer deposits, and was using it in Alameda Research, which was his trading firm, to try to make extra money, and he lost it.
And so this is all because it's on.
Somebody found out about this God mode. And so the lawyer's like, how do we basically cover this up? Dan Friedberg's like, how do we, what do you want me to do? And he's like, hey, some of these people making hundreds of millions of dollars. People are miserable at the end of it, and nothing happens. And that was the start of my show.
So you start just doing interviews, and then when you have them on, there's a lot of, I wasn't aware, I'm not sure, I'm not aware of that, I don't know. There was all this hemming and
everything. I don't have access to the book. Like, I basically knew nothing. So anytime you'd call him out on an issue, you'd say, where's the money? He goes, well, I don't know. It's gone. It's Alameda Research. Ask Alameda. Everyone loses confidence. Everyone sells their FTT tokens. No one wants to buy it. It's worth nothing.
So how did this all fall apart?
Great question. So it's really taken that. I mean, maybe some of them were taking it seriously, but not enough.
So if FTX didn't encourage regulation and CZ didn't get upset at that,
he cleaned up on all his own customers. Just basically taking their money. Like, oh, I know exactly when to fold. I know exactly when to bet. So he had God mode enabled, and then they found out. Success. 2 months. You're going to be making 5 figures a month. 10 months, maybe 6 figures a month. And I've done it for people before. That's the social proof. I've shown people how to do this. A lot of people found out about crypto the same time the mainstream media, everyone else did. So by the time they're actually investing,
it's too late.
It's too late. I think the most fair case you could make about most of this 10 billion is just their own tokens. So CZ takes this opportunity to kind of spread some, sort of information about that. He says, hey, we're actually can take that money and you can send it to what's called a mixer, which is this fancy language for a way to anonymize your transaction. Like you put a service that said, you cannot move, when I deposit with you, you're not going to touch my money. And I said, Sam, if that's true, where's the money of all these people? It's Coinbase. It seems like they're, legitimate. But so much of the problem with crypto is we don't know how much of this stuff is money laundering. We don't know how much of this stuff is I'll have to my feeling is offshore entities should not be they're not subject to our rules. How can you allow offshore I don't know. It's very, they're like, hey, don't work a 9-to-5 job, be free like me. And I'm like, you're here on a Sunday at 5 p.m. How free are you really? You're just something. Because I was just like, why does this make some people tens of millions of dollars and nothing happens? Why are we broke that showed that maybe they're not as healthy as they should be? There would have been a run on the banks and people would have found out. It's just when are they going to find out? He happened to be the final straw, if that makes sense.
So someone would have...
So they were paying everybody to promote this FTX crypto exchange. And the idea this is the next big thing, right? And this is where you're going to make money. Act that bill. And now that it was all a fraud, or the guy who basically pushed it was a fraud, now they're trying to retool it. Eventually got paid out $2 billion.
Whoa.
Yeah. Some of it was in this FTT token, though. So they have a bunch of FTT, right? And so it's like November was when all after the fact he's like he's still playing video games, and you're like, can you have the decency to get off the video game and talk to people?
So bizarre. It's just so bizarre.
And why is so much of your balance sheet made up of your own tokens? It's a big question. So one of the things that FTX had done, and a lot of companies were doing at the time.
So when I see something like that go down, I'm like, how did he get Steven Spielberg? You know, how does someone like a Bernie Madoff or Sam Bankman-Fried, how does he get these people to do this?
With regulators, they were all trying to. Sam was working really closely with regulators to try to get regulations passed, and CZ felt like he was cut out. So that stirred up this like battle between them. And ultimately, I used to play like a variant of League, so I know it's fun, but it's not like fun to the point. Look, this guy's whole thing was like, I'm this effective altruist. Kept making the videos, and ultimately they never did. But I start doing that, and after I covered get rich quick schemes for a while,
and a lot of ums and ahs, and you just kept on him. It was amazing that first of all, it was amazing that he felt like he could
located out in the Bahamas, which is a great place to put your.
Why do they do it in the Bahamas?
Because it's unregulated. So the problem with doing stuff in the United States, that's what ultimately matters, is how much do you have on deposits that you owe out. And so with Binance, we don't really know. The only one we have a little bit more of a look into is lack of regulation and the ability to send peer-to-peer, which means like you and I can just send money to each other directly, no middleman. There's also a really huge opportunity for fraud, scams around, right? Kevin O'Leary's in. So you kind of think you're swimming safely with like other savvy investors. And that's what ultimately gets you to buy in. Bernie Madoff is very similar. It means playing League of Legends. While an investor goes, like at the time that was seen as this charming, like genius thing.
On calls.
You could hear even actually. Okay, yeah, Elizabeth Warren wrote a letter to them. They're being looked at much more closely. I mean, ultimately, all of these things are so opaque in the sense that
gotten away with it.
So many of these scams are like these issues of either regulators not having time, not having the resources, crypto keys all the time. I mean, it's kind of an interesting idea where you go, I'm going to get in before everyone else, but a lot do these trades that are profitable in crypto. So the way he first made his money was he did something where he bought Bitcoin in the U.S. and then he sold it on these Japanese, on your dollars or whatever, euros or whatever, and you put it into this crypto exchange. They have a bank, and they work with that bank. Then they exchange left. And ultimately, because they had lost billions of dollars, it left billions of dollars in credit claims, basically. They didn't have the money. If you're from this one, you're not okay. Or I might say, hey, like CZ has connections to China, like maybe that's a problem. Or CZ has connections to here, maybe that's a big deal. So by the third interview, I'd studied him and I said, okay, how do we get down to FTX's responsibility in this whole thing? And I kept coming back to, it was the terms of
finance hasn't had similar problems.
No, they've had a few runs and they've covered withdrawals. I mean, so it's just, the problem is a lot of it's a black box. LGBTQ plus causes. And it was through a guy, and the guy was like, I feel a little uncomfortable with this. And they said, well, we don't have anyone trustworthy at FTX we can donate through. Who's Friedberg? Shady. This guy
allegedly shady.
Dan Friedberg. No, he's definitely shady. I'll say that. This guy.
What was his? I remember, but what was his?
He blamed all the wrongdoing of FTX on Alameda Research. And he said, I don't control Alameda Research. Even though he was the owner, he's no longer these exchanges where it was worth more. So he was arbitraging this difference in prices. And then after he made his money that way, he lost it on the platform. He says the 18 million was on FTX or whatever, and he never got $1 out of it. But that was what the deal was for. Middleman, because there's no one who controls like Bitcoin, like no one can say like no to a transaction. Now it's like there's nothing to stop you from sending that money, and then it's kind of like, okay, it's a little bit chic to be donating to Democrats. You can do that without too much, negative press. But if I'm the number 3 donor to the Republican Party, that's going to be a bad look. A1Z, A16Z. It was one of those, Sequoia or A16Z. One of them wrote this glowing review of Sam, basically saying he's going to be one of the first trillionaires. So all these other wallets, that it's impossible to know which of those new wallets my dollar's from. It's like, it's just crazy. It's a crazy idea. Yeah, tokens is the individual, you can think of currency, right? So it's like the individual. So Bitcoin is, you have Bitcoin. Then you have, it's one of the cryptocurrencies. You have Ethereum, your hands in both pockets. But publicly, he's just he's donating to Democrats because he says, oh, I'm this, I care about all these issues.
Yeah.
But it's even more cynical than just buying one party 5 minutes or 3 minutes. So I don't want to give off the idea that there's nothing here, but the problem is that with the fact that this guy, he got away with lying so long and perpetuating this image of himself as this generous billionaire, he's sort of the next Warren Buffett, that when everything goes wrong,
do something like that. Why would he publicly communicate?
This is one of the... This is why it's so interesting to me to look at fraud. This is why it fascinates me, as well as I think it's an important thing. $10 million or your data's lost forever. And you're call the police and you go, hey, track this guy. And they're like, to what? To a Bitcoin wallet? To give you this yield. He starts explaining this thing that sounds exactly like a Ponzi scheme. And so ultimately, Matt Levine's yeah, this doesn't really make a lot of sense. But again, it stops short of ads, get rich quick schemes. You've got a bunch of people, flexing in their Lamborghinis, telling you, they're 25 years old, telling you want to get rich by 25 or 22. I'll show you. I made $1 million. As a Matt Levine interview with Sam Bankman-Fried. He didn't call him a fraud outright, but he's like, hey, it seems like you're in the Ponzi business, and business is good.
Whoa. And what did he say to that?
Where's the money? I don't know. But he controls everything. And so it's this is the tactic of these offshore companies is you put I went to school for chemical engineering and hated it. I was miserable. I was I do not want my life to be earning 2% more of a bottom line for ExxonMobil. Or any victims would reach out to me. They'd be like, hey, I'd been scammed by this guy and I didn't realize what was going on. And you showed me, sort of how the whole scheme worked. This is what was going on in crypto. They're called collateralized loans. But what FTX was doing was they were saying, hey, we'll take $1 million from you, but instead of giving you a core system to where they could see you, Joe, deposit a Bitcoin on FTX, they could grab that Bitcoin and start trading with it immediately.
Whoa.
Even though they were never supposed to be able to. They bring on people like Tom Brady to promote it, Larry David in the Super Bowl. They kind of get buy-in from all these big sort of names, and also repute FTT tokens and pay everybody out.
Oh, that's what he thought? He's on amphetamines, right? So he can't be thinking totally clearly.
Okay, so this is funny. They found his League of Legends account, and during some of the calls after it was a fraud, you could hear him clicking in the background. Click, 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 click. He's playing League. And ultimately, one of the ways, even some of the candidates they donated to were through a third employee we didn't even know about. And they were donating through him for all these on sticks or something. It was never, the problem was the foundation was wrong from the beginning. If you don't have enough deposits to cover withdrawals, you just don't have the money, right?
And in the FTX case, how much of it was getting celebrities to endorse the platform?
It's huge. This is what I wanted to say. The more I study,
easier or more profitable for him.
Mm-hmm.
Why would he do that?
I'm not as familiar with the regulation side of things. People were talking about that a lot. So it's things are good for now. Yeah.
You don't know.
That was the problem with the FTX. They had hidden all their numbers. Sam had lied to him safe because Tom Brady's got his money there. So I can put my money there.
Is the lure is how Bitcoin used to be worth very little, and then one time it was with the high of Bitcoin and sell off all his tokens. Would they be still solvent today or still in operation today? Would they not crash, or was this
calling that a fraud early? I have a buddy of mine. He goes by Dirty Bubble Media on Twitter. He's like one of the Anon Twitter accounts. He was calling it a fraud. He thinks he can reestablish control because he's so smart. He is such a good liar that he's like, I can just lie my way out of it. So I think that's why he ultimately talked. His idea was, if I basically screaming about, all these scammers online, and unlike my previous work, which kind of had resonated, like it had gotten, you can watch them. These are real people, Joe. You can be just like them. And so I started watching this, and I started like seeing it. I'm like, oh my gosh, this is so interesting. Don't invest. Like, that's a bad idea.
People were calling bullshit, though. Just like they were calling, there was a few people that were wary that were calling bullshit on Bernie Madoff, and there was a few, and probably overly confident.
Yeah, it's pretty clear he didn't see like the full scope of the situation, especially at first. It seemed like he thought, he was like saying FTX US he's one of the leaders at the NASDAQ. I mean, he was one of the go-to guys. And so you thought, well, I invest with Bernie, like I can't lose. It's like almost, betting on the house. I hadn't really found my footing. But throughout my entire life, I had kind of had this relationship with like hucksters and fraud where, when I was in high school, my mom got thyroid cancer. I who enabled God or who helped cover up God mode. And he's like, well, I don't want to comment on other, people, or it's just like.
Well, how does he skate on that? Like, one guy who lost a hard drive and who's paying people to go through a landfill to try to find his hard drive because there's billions of dollars worth of Bitcoin on that hard drive.
Yeah, people lose to their other friends. They're all saying it's okay. Let me put money in. And it's just a huge case study that just because other people
each other on amphetamines and making billions of dollars. Like, it sounds like a great story if it wasn't illegitimate.
Yeah, ultimately that's the problem. Like, Sam was just hopped up on amphetamine, not having sort of like, it's maybe not big enough. They're good people, a lot of the people going after these guys, but it's like trying to catch everyone who's speeding. Like, you have $1, I'll let you trade with $100, and that's going to be like one reason you come to my offshore exchange. I can offer you more leverage than the guys who are like, the money system has to be safe. Like, your grandma has to be able to charge back her credit card when there's a fraudster, right? Like, or this whole thing doesn't work. You can't rely on people being technically savvy in order to, make something work. If it's going to go to the public, you have to solve all these issues. And unfortunately, we saw crypto kind of go mainstream before they had at the end, when you're like ready for this thing to go down, because I know as soon as I get on, it's going to end pretty quickly after. I said, let me on, let me ask him some real hard questions. Because all these guys are like, Sam, so I decided to start pursuing it step by step. And at first it was like just me discovering like, well, what is this? Well, how does this scheme work? Okay, so I buy this course and then what? Well, crypto is. Sometimes national currencies aren't a great idea and you want an alternative. So, like, look at the Turkish lira. But ultimately, the outcome of that is like, yeah, I encrypt all your data. Joe, send me. I know you're this successful podcaster. I want you to send me teas for a while. But like, so I eventually like pivoted into this crypto direction and learned all about that. But it started just from a curiosity about scammers, and I wanted somebody to say balances. But oops, did I tell you about this $10 billion account? Like, I forgot. It's so silly. You find Tom Brady backs him. Well, Tom Brady's got to have some guys who are looking into this. And then it's like, well, BlackRock backed him. Well, BlackRock definitely has some guys who looked into it. Right. It's Sequoia Capital. They said he was really, everyone got to look at it all at once in one place. And people notice, like, wait a second. A lot of their assets are just their own tokens. Like, they had a Serum token, which they controlled most of. I didn't really know what I was looking at the time. Then I go to college, and all my friends get an MLMs, multi-level marketing, sort of like, just like the, like, hey, you're going to get rich. So I was always getting invited to these, like, get-rich seminars. I hate doctors so much, and it always seems to, like, end up with a sales pitch. Like, it never was like, hey, let me just give you this free thing. It was, like, always, like, there's a catch. So is not surgery. You can just treat it naturally. Just don't worry about, hey, don't listen to the doctors. don't listen to your general practitioner. You can just treat it with like colloidal silver. When you withdraw, there's nothing tying your Ethereum to your particular address to like this random external address because you send it to a different one. And she would drink it up because she thought that would make her better. Ultimately, my dad convinced her, like, you got to get the surgery. Like, this ain't going to fly. You have to, ultimately get the surgery. So if you default on that loan, I'm out $1 million. Another way is I ask for, okay, I'll take some equity in the studio if something goes wrong, right? So I cover my butt if you default on it. Now, I saw all this, and my experiences up to that point, it kind of led me to like, I want to say something, but why is nobody saying anything? It just seemed like there was this, these people pitching this stuff and nobody was talking about it. So I made this random video. Just in the terms of service, they said results may vary. What's that about? Mm-hmm. I mean, ultimately, it's like, and so I realized, like, oh, there's this sophisticated way that they're preying on my psychology, and it's like sort of what's left after the guy who kind of was spearheading this bill, like, was a fraud. It's kind of tough. I was actually randomly like it
was like 70,000 or something like
60 plus, yeah.
So that's the lure. The lure is you buy in for pennies, and one day you're insanely rich. I'm sure you know about that.
You can't do that and then say, oops, I played a little too much of my video games and lost billions of dollars. Like, this doesn't fly.
Well, he wasn't saying that I played the video games, and that's why I lost the money.
But EX said in their terms of service. So one of the really big problems was they actually weren't doing that, but nobody knew because nobody had to look at their books. Like, it was very opaque. And it just was kind of, I was just trying to find my way. I was just trying to, like, even before that, I had done a show where I was, like, trying to break down these topics. I was like,
people that were standing out and saying, none of this makes sense.
Right.
And who were those people?
So there were a few people. There were right people in charge who were going to take the fall. You resign, and then you blame it on them later when everything goes wrong. His problem, though, is Caroline Ellison flipped on him.
So she definitely flipped on him.
She was smart. Yeah. She cooperated fine. And then FTX US went bankrupt. And he's the one who put it into bankruptcy. And then he's telling everyone, oh, no, the money's actually still there. I mean, he was constantly giving a conflicting narrative. So CZ says, hey, maybe they don't have the money. I don't know. Whatever. I'm just going to sell like $2 billion worth.
But he knew what he was doing.
Oh, for sure. He's a shark. Senator's office reached out to me. They're like, what do you think about this? And I was like, I don't know, man. You guys have to. This is y'all's thing to figure out. Ultimately, y'all.
I really enjoyed you catching him on Twitter Spaces. I really enjoyed that. I listened to that whole thing because before that, you have this guy who's this,
we're just going to do a few transactions through your name. That just came out in a press release. It's the new charges. He was basically like they call him straw donors because it's like if I give money to you to give myself, they kind of shut down.